The electrodes were on my nipples.
The answer is that you're a Nazi.
The codger has graciously used his oratory skills that he learned in his old Victorian university with his from his fellow
all boys school.
his
All boys
his
school.
fellowship of men speakers, man speakers. He used his skills to read for us a column from the Chicago Tribune. This is a Tribune article from my hometown of Chicago, entitled "Google Bros Diversity Memo Shows Biological Failings of White Dudes." It was written by Rex Hupke, contact reporter.
When they say that free speech doesn't mean consequence-free speech, censorship is a consequence of free speech. So, okay, they're essentially saying strictly the government can't restrict speech. But the thing is that government privileges speech. So certain types of speech gets privileged and platformed by government, and certain types of speech does not. Is that considered censorship? I would say so. And furthermore, like Karen was saying, getting people saying you suck on your YouTube channel because is a consequence of speech. So where do you draw the line? Do you guys own, like, the people who are part of this kind of ideology, the people who want ideological purity, are they the ones who get to determine the consequences of free speech? And one of those consequences being censorship, apparently. But apparently you can have free speech, but you got to accept the consequences. And one of those consequences is censorship. You got to accept that because censorship is free speech.
Yeah.
No,
Okay,
and
no.
the whole argument is fucking, it's so hypocritical, right? Because I don't think nobody's arguing, right? Nobody, at least on our side of things, is arguing that Anita Sarkeesian shouldn't be able to say whatever the fuck she wants, right? We just don't like it when she starts lobbying, essentially the closest thing we have to a world government to put restraints and constraints on the internet to prevent us from saying what we want.
Right.
So,
But that's not an issue of freedom of speech. That's consequence to to your speech.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: the reason why you have freedom of speech isn't a reward; it's a punishment. Because when people have freedom of speech, and we focus on making speech as free as possible and as unfettered as possible, that means everyone who's basing what they're saying on hatred or emotionality is going to be constantly triggered by questions to their logic and reason. And the resulting cognitive dissonance and discomfort becomes a punishment in and of itself. So the only consequence that free speech should have is more free speech in response. Cognitive dissonance and discomfort is a punishment. So the idea that free speech is a reward is ridiculous. It's as much a punishment as there's a reward. Because every time you speak, and I'm not talking about censorship. The only response to free speech should be more free speech.
well, I wouldn't call free speech a punishment. I would essentially say that, you know, free speech is not just a person's right to speak. It's another person's right to listen, right, to everybody's speech that they care to listen to. So, like, I don't agree with this whole, and there is that argument to be made that, just because you're allowed to say what you want in the town square doesn't mean you get to, like, stand at my living room window and holler shit at me. Well, of course not, right? But the living room is, like, yes, you're sitting in your living room when you're on the internet, but the internet is not your fucking living room.
Okay,
right? And there's a little fucking X there in the corner of the fucking screen that you can click on and make that person standing at your window shouting in it, you just disappear. Because he's not actually there at your window. You are willingly, voluntarily sharing a space with him. And Twitter and Facebook and all of these social media platforms and all of the internet, right? They they all give you plenty of tools to selectively silence the voices that you in particular do not want to hear.
Yep. And that's it. I mean, you have consequences of free speech should be the ability to silence people you don't want to listen to. Yourself, not silence them for other people, but just yourself. And the other thing is that when I say that free speech is a punishment, what I mean is that when you have a bigot, either an ideological bigot or an ethnic or race-based bigot, not that there's much of a difference, but either people who want to remove or eradicate any kind of racial impurity, or people who want to eradicate any kind of wrong-think impurity. Same people, different target of hatred, regardless. When they get up and they say something, when you have free speech, what are you going to get? You're going to get people responding to it. And the punishment comes in the response. And the punishment is more free speech, more responses, questions, poking holes in their logic and reason. And that actually makes them deeply uncomfortable. And they have nowhere to go. In a world of absolute free speech, those bigots have nowhere to go but a place where they're going to get their words thrown back at them and dissected. They're going to be in constant emotional discomfort because there's no place they can go except where those questions are. And that's what I mean by the punishment of free speech. So free speech isn't just a reward. You're not just handing, okay, let's use the proverbial Nazis. You're not just handing Nazis a megaphone. You're also throwing megaphones back at them when you have free speech. And the alternative is to embrace this idea that you can create selective free speech. You can silence people completely. And it's like the alternative of using antibacterial soap and annihilating all of the healthy bacteria on your skin. What ends up happening is that you create this vast wasteland that actually encourages pathogens instead of getting rid of them. What is really needed to reduce the level of pathogens is to have a balanced ecological thought landscape where they can't get a toehold.
Or skinscape.
Yeah, skinscape, where they can't get a toehold because they got all of these other populations of healthy, thriving bacteria who will push back on them.
Not all speech is without consequences. Free speech is not without consequences, but consequences for James Damore's speech, there is a restraint there. There are legal restraints there on the consequences that can be delivered to him, that can be imposed on him by Google for voicing his opinion in this way, right? So number one, federal labor law prohibits a company from punishing its employees for discussing ways of improving working conditions, which that memo was clearly aimed at. That was clearly the intent of his memo, right? California state law prohibits companies from punishing employees for adopting or refusing to adopt a particular political course of action. And so every single social justice warrior who is saying that political affiliation, okay, is not protected under labor law, right, is falling right into the trap of proving that his memo and his objection to diversity training as Google wants to, implement it is a political matter, right? It is politicized and it is political. He framed it as left-right. So essentially, him objecting to mandatory diversity training or implicit bias training, the left has fallen into the trap of allowing that entire debate to be defined as a political debate. And the moment that it became sort of commonly understood as a political issue and as a left-right issue, right, they opened the door for him to sue under this particular law, because him objecting to mandatory diversity training is essentially him objecting to a requirement that he adopt or not adopt, refuse to adopt a political course of action, right? And then there's another federal law that prohibits companies from punishing employees who challenge the company. When they challenge conduct that they believe constitutes illegal discrimination, which he also mentioned in the memo, right? That he thinks that there are some people at Google, because of the intense pressure on them, Google's policies may not be illegal, but because they have this intense pressure on team leaders and people in hiring to make sure that their diversity targets are met, right? He believes that they're engaging in illegal discrimination. Even if it turns out later that that is not the case, that there was nothing illegal going on, the company is not allowed to punish him for challenging that, right? That behavior that he suspects is going on, right? So he has 3 different laws under which to sue Google.
Okay. The author is all for diversity, is not sexist, and eschews stereotypes. The statement is proven false by the aforementioned poorly supported sexist stereotypes.
No. What drives me crazy is like every discussion I've been in with a feminist on this issue, they have not addressed anything he has said, right? They have essentially said, well, his caveats and disclaimers that he's not sexist, he's not racist, that he likes diversity and wants it to improve, that he is not against it, that he doesn't like using stereotypes, that he wants people to be treated as individuals, all of those things. Those were completely insincere, because somehow these people can read his mind and know what he was thinking, right? And then they twist what he said in the memo. They do the equivalent of, if he says men on average are taller than women on average, right? They translate that into there are no short men and no tall women. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then they argue against that. And then they impute motivations and intentions on him. And then they kind of go into his, I bet he just had very little experience with women, and that's why he's such a sexist and a misogynist and blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't understand how he's hurting women with this, right? Which is complete fucking, even if he doesn't have much experience with women, it's completely beside the point as to the truth value of any of his statements and assertions, right? And suggestions, right? And to the sincerity of what he's saying. And this whole, they are reading between the lines and trying to define what he really meant by what he said. So it wouldn't have mattered how carefully he worded it. It wouldn't have mattered how well backed up it was by research. All they're focusing on is what they believe his motivations and intentions to be, which are all bad, what they read in between the lines of what he said, which is all bad and not what he said at all, right? And any disclaimers and caveats he included, they are all insincere and cynical attempts to make all the horrible things that he said more palatable to people and trick people into listening to him. Like, this is really what they believe. And they will not address what he said. And then when I start arguing with them, they start doing the same thing to me. They don't address. I literally had this one fucking cunt feminist on a website, I think it was Wired, right? In the discussion, in the comments, she said, you obviously think that women aren't treated differently in the workplace. The next comment I said, quoted that, and I said, men and women are treated differently everywhere. I put everywhere in all caps, right? And then 1 or 2 comments further on, she says, if you can't stop denying that women are treated differently in the workplace, then this conversation is over. And I'm like, is the workplace not a part of everywhere, all caps? Like, where did I deny that women are treated differently in the workplace and everywhere? Like, what? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't, there is no way you can state it plainly enough for them to not think you're denying it. Like, it's impossible to argue with these people. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm very worked up about this. No, it is
impossible to argue with these people, because what they're trying to do is recreate reality according to their lines and be the ones who determine everybody's identity for them. Yep. And that's just
everybody's motivations and intentions, yep. And like, they're mind readers, and they know what you were thinking better than you do, right? And it's like, are you?
Yeah.
Really? Was it Deborah So who was? She's like a PhD in, I think, evolutionary science or something like that, right? And she's been battling it out on frickin' Twitter, right? Going like, ladies, this is just reality. Get over yourselves. You're really not doing anything to dispel the stereotype that women are overly sensitive and prone to emotionality and maybe more neurotic than men. If you're all taken to your fainting couches over this, right? Over having reality stated to you in a memo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And this is the idea that this asshole, right, is, it makes me really angry that he has decided on my behalf that I should feel insulted by the memo, right? No, I'm insulted by your assumption that you know who I am, that who I am is like all the women who you hang out with who were insulted, right? That women are all the same in this regard. Okay? I'm insulted by that, Mr. Hupke. I'm not going to call you Rex because that's too fucking booyah a name for you. Fuck you. Fucking hate this guy.
Okay. You're also
All
a
right.
Nazi.
When you are using the parts of your brain that are active when you're engaging in higher reasoning, let's call it logic, right? The parts of your brain that are active when you are in an highly emotional state, those are all inhibited, and vice versa. So it's extremely, it's impossible when you are very emotionally stimulated, when you're in a high emotional state, to activate and efficiently use your higher reasoning. And it's impossible when you are in that state of analyzing something using your higher reasoning to feel really deep emotions. And so essentially what we have this guy, right, James Damore, who is sort of trying to look at things logically and dispassionately, and he's advocating de-emphasizing empathy, which is actually a good suggestion based on the science as well. But I think part of the reason there is that he's trying to essentially say we need to deprioritize feelings and actually look at the facts on the ground and try to stay unemotional when we look at those facts and try to interpret what they mean, because we can't reason when we are in a state of high emotionality. And I agree with all of that. And what's the response from his detractors is and you can't even call it autistic screeching because it's not autistic, right? If it was autistic, they'd be like, yes, let's analyze the data, right? No, it's borderline personality fucking screeching. It's people who are not in control of their emotions, screeching and screeching and screeching, right? And refusing to even look at the data in any kind of objective way because they can't, because they were triggered by it and now they're in a state of high emotionality, and it's infuriating. And if I would not trust any of these fucking people, right, who are screeching about this, to do anything, to perform any task that my life depended on.
All I heard was Mike Pence should, in fact, electrocute gays to cure them. That's what I got from it.
Yep,
So.
that's all I got too. I just heard a crackling sound and Karen's massive homophobia.
Don't piss on the electric Pence.
The electrodes were on my nipples.
Okay, and if you want to join us in the after show for the
and who wouldn't after that,
for the conclusion of Codger Google, www.feedthebadger.com.